Hello everyone, I am Chaitra Shri Bhatt. Welcome to this video where I will be explaining about the muscles of the sole of the foot, which is another important topic in the lower limb. So now let us begin with the muscles of the sole of the foot. So as we all know, the part of our lower limb, the part of our feet which touches the ground while we are walking around is the sole of the foot. The sole of the foot consists of 18 intrinsic muscles and 4 extrinsic tendons. The muscles of the sole are described in basically 4 layers which are arranged from the superficial to the deep layers. These muscles are chiefly concerned with supporting the arches of the foot. So in this picture, we have the medial and lateral arch, which is basically the subdivisions of the longitudinal arch. And then we have another anterior transverse arch on the top. And these 3 arches are responsible for the flexibility of the foot. And these arches are supported with the help of the muscles of the sole of the foot. Then the short and long muscles of the sole of the foot act as synergists, that is, they coordinate each other's movement to give rise to a better output. Next, we have the first layer of muscles is seen in this picture, which is the superficial layer. Below this, we have the second layer of muscles. And below this, we have the third layer of muscles. And finally, the fourth layer of muscles are present, that is the deepest layer. So these are how the muscles are arranged in the sole of the foot. And in the further part of this video, we will detailedly discuss the origin, insertion, innervation, and the action of the various muscles that are present along with their names. Next, before we talk about muscles of the sole of the foot, there is something else that we need to know about, and that is the neurovascular planes of the sole. So the neurovascular planes of the sole are present in between the muscle layers, and there are of 2 types. First one, we have the superficial neurovascular plane, which lies between the first and the second layer of muscles. And it basically consists of the trunks of the medial and lateral plantar nerves, and then it consists of the related arteries. Next, we have the deep neurovascular plane, which lies between the third and the fourth layers. Now, this consists of the deep branches of the lateral plantar nerve and the respective artery. As the name suggests, neurovascular plane, that it consists of nerves and the arteries, which are basically responsible for supplying the various muscles of the sole. Now let us discuss in detail. As I mentioned before, the sole purpose of this video is to concentrate on the muscles of the sole. So let us begin off with the first layer of muscles in the sole of the foot. So the very first layer we have is the first layer. That is, it consists of the first muscle in the first layer of muscle is the abductor hallucis. So as we can see in this picture, this is the abductor hallucis muscle, and this is the medial side of the foot, while this is the lateral side of the foot. Now this, as marked in C, is the calcaneal tuberosity. So what does this say? Medial tuberosity, medial process of the calcaneal tuberosity. So this part is the medial process of the calcaneal tuberosity from where it originates, and then it gets inserted in the medial side of the base of the proximal phalanx of the greater toe. So now this is the greater toe, this is the lesser toe, and this is the proximal phalanx, and this is its base. And so it's getting inserted in the medial side of the base of the proximal phalanx of the greater toe. Now it is innervated by the medial plantar nerve from the tibial nerve, which consists of root value S1, S2, and S3. This is quite important because as we can observe, there are many other muscles of the sole of the foot which are supplied or innervated by the same nerve. So S1, S2, S3 is the root value of the medial plantar nerve, which arises from the tibial nerve. The function of the abductor hallucis, as the name suggests, is abducting and flexing the greater toe where it is inserted at the metatarsophalangeal joint. So the joint where the metatarsals and the phalanges are connected, that is the metatarsophalangeal joint. And the prime function of the abductor hallucis is to abduct and flex the greater toe at this particular joint. Next, we have the flexus digitorum brevis. This is the flexor digitorum brevis muscle, and it arises from the medial process of the calcaneum tuberosity and the plantar aponeurosis again. So as we know, this is the medial process of the calcaneal tuberosity, as we observed here also. So from here it arises, and then there is something called the plantar aponeurosis. So the deep fascia of the sole of the foot is called as the plantar fascia. So this plantar fascia is divided into three parts: the central part, medial part, and the lateral part. Now the central part of the plantar fascia is especially thickened, because of which it is called as the plantar aponeurosis, and it arises exactly right where the flexor digitorum brevis is arising from, and it gets inserted in the sides of the plantar surface of the middle phalanges of the lateral four toes. So apart from the greater toe, these are the other four toes that are present. These are the lateral toes, and the sides of the plantar surface of the middle phalanges of the lateral four toes is the insertion of the flexor digitorum brevis. And again, it is innervated by the medial plantar nerve from the tibial nerve, and its major function is to flex the lateral four toes at the proximal interphalangeal joint. So this is the proximal interphalangeal joint. So at this particular joint, the function of the flexor digitorum brevis is to flex the four toes. Next, we have the abductor digiti minima, which is this particular muscle, where the cursor has marked. So the lateral and medial processes of the calcaneal tuberosity marks the origin of this muscle. And then there is a band of connective tissue that connects the calcaneus and the base of the metatarsal. So here is the lateral and medial processes of the calcaneal tuberosity from where it arises, and it gets inserted in the lateral side of the base of the proximal phalanx of the little toe. So this is the little toe, and this is the lateral side of the base of the proximal phalanx where it gets inserted. And then the innervation is again by the lateral plantar nerve from the tibial nerve, which has the same root value, that is S1, S2, and S3. And its major function is to abduct the little toe at the metatarsophalangeal joint. As the name suggests, it's an abductor, and it abducts the little toe at the metatarsophalangeal joint. So that is with the first layer of muscles of the sole of the foot. Next, let us go to the second layer of muscles of the sole of the foot. So the very first muscle in the second layer of muscles is the quadratus plantae, which is this particular muscle. This is the quadratus plantae. We can remember it because quadratus is like a polygon with four sides, and I have drawn a polygon over there. So the medial surface of the calcaneus and lateral process of the calcaneal tuberosity. So the medial surface of the calcaneus and the lateral process of the calcaneal tuberosity marks the origin of this muscle, and it gets inserted in the lateral side of the tendon of the flexor digitorum longus in the proximal sole of the foot. It is innervated by the lateral plantar nerve that arises from the tibial nerve, again with root value S1, S2, and S3. And its major function is to assist another muscle called flexor digitorum longus tendon in flexing the toes 2 to 5. So these four muscles, the lateral four toes, are flexed with the help of the flexor digitorum longus, and this particular quadratus plantae is helping the flexor digitorum longus in flexing these toes. Next, we have the four lumbricals. The first lumbrical arises from the medial side of the tendon of the flexor digitorum longus associated with toe 2. So this is the medial side of the flexor digitorum longus from which the first lumbrical is arising from. And then we have the second, third, and fourth lumbricals arising adjacent to the surfaces of the adjacent tendons of the flexor digitorum longus. So these are the tendons of the flexor digitorum longus, and adjacent to these tendons we have the lumbricals arising, and then they gets inserted, as we can observe here, in the medial free margin of the extensor hoods of the 2 to 4 toes. So these are the medial free margins of the extensor hoods and to where this muscle gets inserted into. And then the innervation is, the first lumbrical is innervated by the medial plantar nerve, whereas the second, third, and the fourth lumbricals are innervated by the lateral plantar nerve from the tibial nerve. So I'll tell it again. So the first lumbrical is innervated by the medial plantar nerve, whereas the second, third, and fourth lumbricals are innervated by the lateral plantar nerve. Both of them arise from the tibial nerve. The function of the lumbricals is the flexion and of the metatarsophalangeal joint and extension of the interphalangeal joint. So the metatarsophalangeal joint is flexed, and the interphalangeal joints are extended with the help of the lumbricals. So basically, more or less, the functions of the lumbricals are same as that of the hand lumbricals. So that is, we are done with the second layer of the muscles. Now let us go into the third and fourth layers. The third layer of the muscles of the sole of the foot consists of three muscles. The first one being flexor digiti minimi brevis. So this is the flexor digiti minimi brevis, and as I mentioned before, this is the medial side, and this will be the lateral side, this will be the greater toe, and this will be the lesser toe. So the origin of the flexor digiti minimi brevis is from the base of the metatarsal phi and related sheath of the fibularis longus tendon. So there is the fibularis longus tendon, which is present on the fifth toe of the sole, and then the base of the metatarsal marks the origin of this muscle, and it gets inserted on the lateral side of the base of the proximal phalanx of the little toe, which we are familiar with this position already. And then it's innervated by the lateral plantar nerve that arises from the tibial nerve, and it has root value S2 and S3. And the function of the flexor digiti minimi brevis is to flex the little toe at the metatarsophalangeal joint. So now next, let us go to the second muscle, that is the flexor hallucis brevis, which is this muscle, which is present like this, like in a split manner. So the plantar surface of the cuboid and lateral cuneiform and tendon of the tibialis posterior. So the plantar surface of the cuboid and the lateral cuneiform. So there are three cuneiforms, and this is arising from the lateral cuneiform. And then the tendon of the tibialis posterior mark the two origins of the flexor hallucis brevis and gets inserted in the lateral and the medial side of the base of the proximal phalanx of the greater toe. So these two different origins and get inserted at two different places, which are not very much different from each other. One it gets attached to the lateral, and the other one gets attached to the medial side of the base of the proximal phalanx of the greater toe. It is innervated by the medial plantar nerve that is arising from the tibial nerve again, and it has root value S1 and S2. And the major function of the flexor hallucis brevis, again, as mentioned in the name, it flexes the metatarsophalangeal joint of the greater toe. Next, we have the adductor hallucis muscle. So that name suggests it will have to do something with adduction. So let us look into the origin of this muscle. So the transverse head is originated from the ligaments associated with the metatarsophalangeal joints of the lateral three toes. Then the oblique head arises from the bases of the metatarsals 2 to 4 from the sheath covering the fibularis longus. So the transverse head is associated with the metatarsophalangeal joints of the lateral three toes. So these are the metatarsophalangeal joints of the lateral three toes, and from here the transverse head arises. And then we have the oblique head arising from the base of the metatarsals of the 2, 3, and 4 toes, which cover the fibularis longus. So again, this also has two different origins, but then they seem to join or insert at the same point, that is the lateral side of the base of the proximal phalanx of the greater toe. That is this part. This is the lateral side of the proximal phalanx of the greater toe. It is innervated by the lateral plantar nerve that arises from the tibial nerve again, and it has root value S2 and S3 as we saw before. And as I mentioned before, the function of the adductor hallucis will be to adduct the great toe at the metatarsophalangeal joint. So these are the functions of the various muscles of the third layer of muscles in the sole of foot. Now moving on to the fourth layer of muscles in the sole of the foot. The very first muscle we have in the fourth layer is the dorsal interossei. So the dorsal interossei, as mentioned over here, these are the four parts of the dorsal interossei, and they arise or originate from the sides of the adjacent metatarsals. So these are the particular metatarsals. Adjacent to the metatarsals rise the origin of this muscle. It arises from there and gets inserted in the extensor hoods and bases of the proximal phalanges of 2 to 4. So these are the toes 2 to 4, 2, 3, and 4. So it gets inserted in the hoods and bases of the proximal phalanges of these toes, and it is innervated by the lateral plantar nerve from the tibial nerve. The first and second dorsal interossei are also innervated by the deep fibular nerve. So all the interossei are innervated by the lateral plantar nerve that arises from the tibial nerve, and we have seen this a lot of times before. But the first and second dorsal interossei are also innervated by another nerve called as the deep fibular nerve, which has root value S2 and S3, and the function of the dorsal interossei, that is this muscle, it helps in abduction of the toes 2 to 4 at the metatarsophalangeal joint, and it resists the extension of the metatarsophalangeal joints and flexion of the interphalangeal joints. So its major function is that when the metatarsophalangeal joints are extended, it helps in the resistance, and also it resists the flexion of the interphalangeal joints. Next, we have the plantar ossei. So here we can see the plantar ossei muscles, which originate from the medial sides of the metatarsals from 3, 4, and 5. So these are the medial side of the metatarsal from where the plantar ossei are originating, and then as usual they get inserted in the extensor hoods and bases of the proximal phalanges of the toes 3 to 5, and then it is innervated by the lateral plantar nerve again. And then the major function of the plantar ossei is adduction of toes 3 to 4 at the metatarsophalangeal joint, and again it resists extension of the metatarsophalangeal joints and the flexion of the interphalangeal joints. So now, as we have seen properly, these are the various muscles which are present in the sole of the foot, that is from the superficial to the deep layer. We have seen them in detail. This is the shortest way we can remember the origin, insertion, and innervation and function. I hope you found this video useful. Thank you so much for your patience, and thank you for listening to me all the while. Thank you so much.